At the end of the case study entitled Famine in Africa, there's a brief description of a famous argument that is made by the philosopher Peter Singer. In this argument, Singer contends that there is an obligation to give to charity. More specifically, this argument holds that we have an obligation to donate our resources in whichever way will do the most good, even if this means the people we're obligated to help are complete strangers who live very far away from us. This argument can be found in Singer's well-known 1972 article entitled Famine, Affluence, and Morality. In this article, Singer makes the following claim, which is foundational for his entire argument. Singer states that if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening, without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought morally to do it. So if it is true that there are people in the world suffering from lack of food and medical care, and if it is also true that some people have resources that could help to alleviate such suffering without sacrificing anything of great moral import, then it follows that those individuals would have a moral obligation to give to charitable organizations working to alleviate those problems. Of course, this argument depends upon the core principle that I just highlighted, the claim that we have a moral duty to prevent bad things from happening whenever we can do so without sacrificing anything important. But what reason does Singer give for us to think that this fundamental principle is correct? In support of this principle, Singer presents a famous thought experiment. Imagine, says Singer, that you come across a small child drowning in a shallow pond. Do you have an obligation to save that child's life? Intuitively, we think that you would, and we would likely hold anyone who failed to help at all as morally blameworthy. But what if the person passing by the child protested that they didn't want to get their new clothes dirty, or what if they said that saving the child's life might make them late for a meeting? Would we find these excuses reasonable? Probably not. What this suggests is that we do think there is a moral obligation to prevent bad things from happening when doing so doesn't require any sacrifice of, as Singer says, comparable moral importance. In this case, this person having to get their new clothes dirty is not as important from a moral point of view as the life he could have saved by intervening. All of this might largely seem like moral common sense. However, what Singer wants to argue is that if we accept this idea, then it does have some rather radical consequences. To see this, let's consider a variation of that original thought experiment, one that is a bit more fanciful, but which gets to an important philosophical point. Imagine that you receive a call on your cell phone from an unlisted number. Normally, let's say you hang up when you get calls like that, but today, for whatever reason, you just decide to answer. The person on the other end tells you that as you speak, they are in a position where they could save a child who is drowning. Just like before, the child is drowning in a shallow pond, but this time they are not within your immediate vicinity. Let's say they're very far away. Let's imagine that this is all happening in China. At present, the person you are talking to is not really inclined to help. However, they will save the child's life if you agree to forego the upcoming vacation to the Bahamas that you've been looking forward to and planning for some time. The question is, do you have a moral obligation to skip the vacation so that the child's life can be saved? Now, upon hearing this, you likely will have all sorts of questions. Questions such as, how did this person get my number? Or, how do I know this isn't just a prank call? And why does this person care so much about whether I go on vacation or not? But for the sake of the thought experiment, let's put those worries aside. Assume that you know everything this person is saying is true. There really is a child drowning in China who will be saved if you simply skip your upcoming tropical vacation. The question is, are you morally obligated to do so? If we take Singer's principle seriously, then it seems that we would be obligated to do that. To see this, let's focus on the two important respects in which this second thought experiment is different from the original. First, the sacrifice involved in this revised thought experiment situation is greater than in the original. In the original version, you only had to sacrifice a few minutes of your time and maybe get your clothes dirty. In the revised thought experiment, however, you have to sacrifice the enjoyment of a vacation you have been greatly looking forward to. Yet while this sacrifice is greater, is it of comparable moral importance to the life of another fellow human being? Shouldn't we value a week's enjoyment over the life of some other person? It seems reasonable to claim that we should not. A second difference is that in the original situation, the drowning child was very close to us. However, in the revised thought experiment, the drowning child is far away from us in an entirely different country. Yet, Singer's principle only refers to preventing bad things from happening. The principle doesn't discriminate between bad things happening close to us and bad things happening far away from us. And this does make some intuitive sense. After all, isn't the death of a child in China just as tragic and horrible as the death of a child in the United States? If the argument Singer presents here is sound, then it has some rather clear and possibly radical consequences for our everyday lives. This is because there are, metaphorically speaking, drowning children all over the world, children who are suffering from lack of food and medical care. This may very well be happening where we live, but in many cases the worst instances may be happening in places that are very far away that we've never been to. Furthermore, there are numerous charities working to alleviate this suffering that could benefit from additional funding. As such, there is a real sense in which every dollar a person spends on things he or she does not really need, from subscriptions to streaming services to eating at a nice restaurant to vacations, comes to some extent at the expense of a life that could be saved. For this reason, Singer believes, at least for those with discretionary income, that charitable giving is a moral obligation, and furthermore, an obligation that isn't restricted by geographic boundaries.